Hi everyone, and it's Dr. RAMANI here. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on all kinds of things related to narcissism. Everything you want to know about relationships, how this personality pattern works, how it affects us, and how to navigate it. Today I'm going to be taking on some of the more recent science. As part of what I do on this YouTube channel, I do try to sort of study what is the sort of state of the science in narcissism and provide sort of an update on what that is, because there's some really great work going on by scholars all around the world. Today we're going to talk specifically about some of the research on narcissism and aggression. Now, like I said, you got to know, in any area of mental health, you want to know the science so we can really understand what these topics are about from a data-driven perspective. Now, a couple of months ago, a brilliant scholarly article written by doctors Sophie Kirovic and Brad Bushman from Ohio State University took on the big topic of the association between narcissism and aggression, and they did this in a very comprehensive manner. This paper is one of the best examinations I have ever seen of this issue. The authors looked at the results of 437 existing individual studies as a means of drawing their conclusions. The power of this methodology of looking at many studies is that this is not just the conclusion of one study. This is the cumulative evidence that is piled up across hundreds of studies examining this issue in studies and samples around the world and across different types of population. Now, what Kirovic and Bushman found was that regardless of gender, culture, age, the way the research was designed, and of how aggression was measured and how narcissism was measured, the findings were absolutely consistent. Narcissism is clearly associated with aggression. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, you can say that as big as you want, Dr. RAMANI. Big surprise! I already knew that. But the fact is, maybe we did suspect that, but in the world of science and of policy, individual stories aren't enough. This study is groundbreaking because the authors were able to show very clearly that this association is universal. This is no longer a speculation. I mean, the scientist in me needs to see the data, and these researchers were able to show it. The real brilliance of this article, though, is that because they looked at so many studies, they could look at these issues of, for example, of aggression and narcissism measured in so many different ways. When they looked at aggression, they framed it in different ways, including physical aggression, verbal aggression, direct expression of aggression, for example, directly aggressing against a victim who is right in front of the aggressor, and indirect aggression, for example, a smear campaign against someone. An important component of aggression that they captured is something called displaced aggression as well. Think of that as being in the presence of someone who's having a rageful episode that you witness, but that rageful episode is not necessarily directed at you. And they also captured under aggression both online and in-person bullying and online trolling, or provoking people online. All of these things taken together accurately were captured under their definition of aggression. Now, one thing that was particularly striking to me was that the authors observed comparable associations between grandiose narcissism and aggression and covert/vulnerable narcissism. They found it, and aggression. They found it regardless of the type of narcissism. Another important finding is that narcissism was also associated with something called reactive aggression. Reactive aggression is provocation-based aggression, as well as what they call proactive aggression, which is to aggress against someone without provocation, but instead you do it because of some other incentive, maybe to gain advantage or to dominate someone. And they found a comparably strong association between narcissism and actual violence, meaning that narcissism is a risk factor, as we call it, for dangerous and violent behavior. Interestingly, Dr. Bushman's other research, he was one of the authors on who was one of the authors on this paper, has also done his own prior research suggesting that narcissism is a risk factor for mass shootings, something many of us who do this work on narcissism have suspected for a long time, and he was able to pull together the data and the science on that. There's long been a belief that narcissistic people are hot-headed, meaning that they're aggressive when they feel provoked. Where this study that I'm talking about was so striking is that, yes, that is true. But they also found that the narcissistic personality is associated with aggression even when there is no provocation. So that actually raises the risk level associated with this personality style. Provocation does matter because provocation does in fact increase narcissistic aggression, which holds up a model that other people have brought up of this idea that aggression is an ego-protecting stance in narcissistic people. That's something that's been suggested by other past researchers like Ray Baumeister. But since the research suggests that even in the absence of provocation, there is aggression, ego protection is not the only function that aggression is serving. A really fascinating cultural finding also emerged in their research. Narcissism was associated with violence and aggression, regardless of whether it was conducted in a collectivistic or individualistic culture. Now, the authors were very clear to point out that much less of this research has been conducted in collectivistic cultures, but in those studies that were, they found similar associations. The traditional belief that's often been out there is that this idea of collectivism, that this may be protective against this link between narcissism and aggression, that didn't bear out. And in that way, the association between narcissism and aggression supersedes all the protections of a collectivistic cultural bias. This goes beyond a message that in an individualistic culture where it's every person for themselves, this suggests that there's something embedded within the narcissistic individual, regardless of whether the culture is about the group or the individual. Now, when I read this study again and again, and I've even had the pleasure of corresponding with the authors about it, which was a tremendous honor, what struck me is the danger we have in society when we minimize and when we play down the impacts of this personality style. The tendency that we have of just sort of lightheartedly viewing narcissism as just sort of vain, arrogant, preening, and pretentious, but nothing beyond that. This research suggests, one more brick in that wall, that this is dangerous. There are so many important implications in the findings of this research paper. In the area, for example, of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, this implies that the unique dangers of narcissism in these spaces, because since the nature of intimate relationships, the closeness, imply that there's going to be a greater likelihood of these so-called provocation episodes, even about small issues, and then a risk of even more violence. In the area of workplace violence, there is the implication in these research findings that narcissism is going to result in more dangerous workplaces. In the area of public safety, for example, Dr. Bushman's work on mass shootings and narcissism suggests the risks that are inherent in that. In our day-to-day lives, that narcissism is actually something that is essential for legal and justice systems to understand, for politicians to understand, for policymakers to understand, for public health officials to understand, and for educators to understand, and above all else, for mental health practitioners and researchers to understand. I have no idea what the hell prevention looks like when it comes to narcissism. Let's face it, narcissism isn't against the law, but it sure is a risk factor for lots of dangerous illegal behavior and dangerous behavior in general. However, there is very little I believe we can do to prevent it, because that would require a wholesale takeover of parenting and early childhood development. Good luck with that. Now, this isn't just about an annoying or gaslighting partner. That's not all that narcissism's about. It's not just about a manipulative parent or a cheating ex. This paper suggests that narcissism is about a real societal danger associated with a personality pattern that society is more often than not likely to enable. We make narcissistic people our leaders, our heroes, and we view their lives as aspirational. We are, in essence, revering the very patterns associated with personalities that make the world a more dangerous place. If ever science was a wake-up call, it's in this article. Now, the full citation for this article, for those of you who are interested in the research or students or therapists or academics, go pull it because the reference is there. I can't recommend it enough. It is one of the most important pieces of work I have read in years. Really, congratulations and gratitude to Drs. Kirovic and Bushman for this work. Those of you who are interested in it, really take this article in, because the data, all of it, is some of the most compelling stuff I've read in a while. It always helps when we suspect something in the world of narcissism, when people put in the years of work, and I know this work took them years to do, to really show that the data supports a link here. And the more we have these supportive links through the data, the more that there may someday, probably long after I'm dead and gone, but there may someday be a willingness to see these patterns and understand them. So we might actually be able to help people who find themselves in these situations, help them not only become safer, but possibly create policy that might potentially make this world a safer place. Thanks again.